Hi, welcome to Analytics AI Essentials, Quantum Metrics webinar series dedicated to exploring the power and potential of Gen AI and digital analytics. In each episode, we'll dive into the best practices and trends of this hot topic with insights from digital experts. Is your organization struggling to recognize the power and potential of AI? If you've been able to integrate Gen AI into your organization, are you seeing its impact? Today, we're excited to kick things off with the first episode of our four-part series, From Promise to Practice, the real value of AI and analytics featuring Insight Partners. With that, I'll hand it off to our speakers, Mario and Lonnie. Take it away.
Thank you, Dylan. Hi, everyone. I'm Mario Ciabarra, the founder and CEO of Quantum Metric. Super excited to be joined today by Lonne Jaffe. He's the managing director at Insight Partners, and we're going to be talking about the value of Gen AI in the analytics space. Now, one of the funny things about Lonnie is I like to introduce him to my friends as the guy the White House called to get a quick update on what the heck is Gen AI and what do we need to do about it. But Lonnie, maybe you can do a better introduction than I can, so I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mario. So I am a managing director at Insight Partners. I joined Insight a little over 7 years ago. I work on a lot of our deeper tech investments. So that ends up being things like data infrastructure, analytics, AI infrastructure, some applied AI companies, often with more technical founding teams. And I was at IBM for about 13 years before that. And I was also CEO of an Insight portfolio company.
I feel like every time we chat, I'm hearing about you giving some conversation about the value of generative AI or how to implement generative AI or the future of generative AI. How did you fall into this position of being like the go-to Gen AI guy at least Insight, at least the White House, maybe others?
So the way I've been thinking about it, right, there was a set of AI tools that really started to pick up steam after 2012, really with the release of AlexNet, that that were kind of more at their core prediction systems using neural networks, right? So like in the old days, you used to have the way that we got software is that humans would show up at work and they would type on their keyboards with their fingers, and then the software would come out of that, right? And then starting around that time frame, this was built on decades of research, but there was this increased usage of these prediction systems that where you created the software by feeding the data into the machine. So you would send the machine data, and then software would come out, and that software would do something, right? It could do fraud detection or cybersecurity, or in the case of quantum metric, there was all sorts of really interesting analytics it could do. And those systems were very powerful. They were often systems that a human could not write if they had tried to, and also they could do things that a human wouldn't be able to do. And then it was really kind of so we were pretty active at that layer. So invested in companies like Iterative Health, which can do colonoscopy polyp detection, or Overjet, which can tell you whether you need a crown or a filling based on a dental X-ray, or Tractable, which you take a photo of a damaged vehicle and estimate how much it will cost to repair the damaged vehicle, or Zest AI, which can use more features to make better loan origination decisions, things like that. So that the core capabilities are prediction, recommendation, classification. And then in 2017, you saw this emergence of, starting really with the OpenAI sentiment neuron paper, where they were trying to get it to predict Amazon customer. They were feeding it Amazon product reviews and trying to get it to predict the next letter in the block of text. And as an emergent property, it developed one of the neurons in this neural network became a state-of-the-art sentiment classifier, um, where it could tell you whether the sentence was positive or negative. But it just kind of grew in the lab, right, as an emergent property. And then 60 days later, when Google Research published "Attention is all you need," there was the OpenAI team recognized this as a much more scalable architecture. They refactored their LLM. They added a huge number of GPUs from NVIDIA. They added all the data from the internet, and lo and behold, we have GPT-2, GPT-3, GPT-4, and we could write a poem in the style of Gilgamesh about you and me talking about Felix AI and have it rhyme, and certainly be better than anything you or I could write. And so that was a pretty different phenomenon. What's been really interesting about it is just to see the way this new type of technology has shifted the balance of power in the industry. And talk a little bit more about that.
So like, I guess I would summarize it with like, there's a lot of people that are getting into AI because of ChatGPT, because of generative AI, but your research, your time in AI dates back years prior. And because of that, like you've got years of thought going into how does AI actually get implemented, both in the enterprise and in the real world. And you gave a couple of examples of some businesses that have been successful with AI. Now, I'd love to transition to generative AI. What's shocked you? And I'm thinking, the audience is joining us to talk about analytics. So if you have maybe an example around analytics of something that's shocked you, something that, wow, I didn't see that coming, but something that generative AI unlocked.
I would say like one really surprising aspect of it for me has been how quickly some of our portfolio companies have been able to get really powerful generative AI features into production compared to if you sort of think about would be an example like the public cloud, right? You had on-premise customer relationship management systems, and they were pretty dominant, right? And then Salesforce came on the scene, and they kind of had the cloud version of that market to themselves for years before the legacy incumbents were able to ship a cloud product. And even then, it wasn't very good, and Salesforce had really achieved kind of dominant vendor market dynamics at that point. And that isn't what we're noticing with the on the generative AI side of things. And we've had dozens of companies that they had their first hackathon in February of 2023 and shipped their product into production by that summer. And it wasn't just a toy; it was like a really powerful product or suite of products that could. I was just keynoting at the Central Reach annual customer event, and they shipped half a dozen products already that customers view as pretty magical in terms of what they could do around autism treatment and clinical notes and claim submission and things like that. We have a company, Atlan AI, which is like a cloud native data catalog, and they were already growing really rapidly. But their generative AI feature, Atlan AI, it allows you to ask questions of your data. It needs the underlying catalog to work, right? So it needs to look in the catalog, and it's like, well, some of the answers to these questions are in Salesforce, so I need to do a JSON query and an API call, and some of it is in Snowflake, and I need to do a large table join and bring the results back. But if you sort of think about the scope of something like that, or even GitHub Copilot, right, which charges significantly more than the underlying GitHub for the product, but if it works for you and it helps write huge portions of your code, it's really transformative. And so there's this class of company that has a product that people already love, right? Sort of a category leading player that is already high growth and has brand that is has a reputation for amazing product craftsmanship and great talent, trust. They already have a lot of distribution. Customers really like the product, and the generative AI feature, can be double or triple the value as the underlying product, even if it requires the underlying product to work. And that's been a new shape offering or strategy impact that we haven't seen with a lot of these other technology shifts. Um, and people will sometimes ask, well, how are people going to monetize these technologies? And we're actually seeing people monetize a lot of them the really old-fashioned way, which is to charge for it.
So Lonnie, I remember back in 2018 timeframe, you kept having this theme, this discussion with me about the value of data. And I'm like, yeah, sure, Lonnie. Like, you have a question, I have an answer. Like, if you work at XYZ customer of ours, like, I have an answer. And you said, no, no, like the value of having all of this data. And, I think if generative AI didn't come about, I'm not sure I would have totally understand what you were saying. Now, generative AI has landed. And I think it's like clear to everyone that when you have lots of data, you can do amazing things. I mean, I think to some degree, that's what we're seeing with these large language models, these LLMs. Um, what are you seeing the value of data, and its change in value, not just at creating the foundational models, but for the enterprises implementing a solution? What are you seeing?
Yeah, so I think there's actually some nuance to it, right? Like there are some AI systems where as they get more data, the system becomes more accurate and therefore it produces better predictions and therefore it gets more customers and therefore it gets more data and it becomes this data moat or in a virtuous data cycle. And I don't want to undervalue those businesses like search, they're very powerful, long-term, durable advantages. But there's actually a lot of cases where the models themselves have significantly or rapidly diminishing returns to data, which doesn't mean that you shouldn't collect data. It just doesn't necessarily represent a strategic advantage. And in the case of generative AI, so much of the AI part, and I think this is a big part of the reason we were earlier about how easy it comparatively or how quick comparatively it's been for existing category incumbents to add generative AI features, is that the AI part is being provided like electricity over the internet from the large frontier labs like OpenAI, Gemini, and Anthropic, and a couple of others. And so that's really changed the texture of the data advantage. So now the kind of data that is most powerful is the data that customers already have in your product because they trust the brand and they trust the product, and the product is already really valuable. So think about it like if you use Gmail for your personal email, like, you could, in theory, let a startup have access to your personal email so that it could help you manage your inbox and things like that. But, Google Gemini, which is very powerful, will also be able to do that within Gmail and your emails used for things like password resets and multi-factor authentication. And so you have this level of trust where you don't have to permission yet another company into your email, and they will have deeper instrumented hooks into the system, so they'll be able to do more. And so you're seeing this with like Adobe Photoshop Generative Fill and Microsoft Office 365 Copilot. And so like many of these existing tools that people trust are adding features. And I think Quantimetric is an amazing example of this with Felix in that the product is already very powerful and can do amazing analytics that customers love. Then it also stores a lot of data in it. And so if you take something like a session, maybe a 15-minute session, if somebody goes to the website and they are looking to get a dress and they find a dress they like and then they try to check out. And at the checkout page, they notice that there's a checkbox below the fold, or they don't notice that there's a checkbox below the fold that says, I consent to something. And they click, the button a bunch of times to check out and they get really frustrated and then they abandon the cart. And, of course, you can do some interesting analytics and you can present that, but at the end of the day, somebody might just watch that video. But if you can take that session and put it into Gemini Flash and get a really crisp summary, like the person went to the site, they looked at a couple things, they found the dress that they liked, they tried to check out, they didn't notice the checkbox below the fold, and therefore they got frustrated and abandoned the cart. And you can take that couple sentence summary. That is a qualitatively different product. It's not just convenient to have like a summary. It's like all of a sudden you can surface that to a call center, and the call center person, instead of saying, "How can I help you?" they can say, "Let me tell you about the checkbox below the fold." And so it just opens up this level of integration capability, and it makes the data that the product was already collecting, that the customer already entrusted with quantum metric, that much more valuable. And
I think it's
it's related,
fascinating. Sorry, go ahead.
and it's related to a number of other things like partner scale effects, right? Where you can then start to integrate with more players, and everyone wants to use quantum metric because everyone else is integrated with quantum metric. And it relates to product craftsmanship, having a beautiful product that the generative AI tool can use as a tool, and then it can use the generative AI capabilities as a tool. And then you still can get things like usage demand side economies of scale over time. Like as people use the product more, it can learn from usage and get feedback data. But the real magic happens with the blend of the powerful foundation model and the adaptive culture and talent and product quality that you already have.
Yeah, I was thinking it's a fascinating perspective, and like no one's going to build, or it's unlikely for a company to be successful at getting our data and building a generative AI product on top of it. So I think like this back and forth in my head that's happening of like, do the incumbents have more opportunity with generative AI, or is it these new series of startups that will find a way to take the data the incumbents have captured and unlock something new. Like, where do you think? Like, what do you? How do you think the next couple of years are going to play out? Because we've seen startups come in and they have a new idea, something that the incumbents not thinking about, and they're able to move quickly, like really fast now with generative AI, but they don't have the data. So, like, there's some advantages and disadvantages. How do you think it's going to play out?
Yeah. So the data is definitely an ingredient here, an important one. There's also the product itself, right? So if you think about the what the generative AI tool can do, and maybe Felix AI Data Engineer is a good example here. Like, it's a powerful generative AI capability that can help you get quantum metrics set up to be able to observe all the things that you would want to, gather all the telemetry. It knows how to use quantum metric as a tool without the rest of the deep, rich capabilities of quantum metric. It doesn't make that much sense as a generative AI feature. So like a startup can show up and build something like Felix AI Data Engineer, but they don't have quantum metric to be able to use as a tool in the exact same way. So that's another piece. And then distribution is also a piece. Like, you already have so many of the largest companies in the world who trust uh, the product. And so that distribution and trust, the blend of those two, sort of like what you have companies like Disney and child-friendly entertainment, or Apple and privacy, right? Like, those brands, they're not perfect, right? But they do engender a certain amount of trust. So the combination of the distribution, the existing product that has a lot of functionality that the generative AI system can use as a tool, and the data asset that customers already store in the product. Those things are tilting the balance of power from startups, which you might see in a normal technology shift, towards category leading incumbents. I'm not talking about incumbents who have products that customers don't love, right? Incumbents whose business model is to kind of lock people in and cut costs, and those kinds of companies might be actually more vulnerable now, because I can see generative AI help to erode some of the switching costs, like rewriting legacy code onto new platforms, things like that. But for the category leading companies where they're rapidly growing, they have investors like Insight Partners who can invest over long term time horizons, have really good product intuitions, product craftsmanship, amazing adaptive internal talent. That those seem to be the winners so far. There are some areas that are lending themselves a little bit more towards startups, but they tend to be areas where startups are doing a thing that could not be done before at all, right? Like, something completely new that was impossible before and is now possible but still hard, as Kevin Scott from Microsoft has been saying. And so those things can lend themselves to startups, because there may not be a category leading incumbent by definition, because it wasn't possible
It's funny you just saying that sentence out loud. This makes me think about my vision hadn't really changed over the course of the last 9 years for quantum, but there was this promise, this desire to have this automatic configuration. It was in the first video explainer in 2015 of quantum, and this Felix AI data engineer is like that promise coming to life. And I don't want to argue whether or not it was or wasn't possible, because I don't think that generative AI is unlocking things that were impossible necessarily always, but it was just really, really hard to get to, like in such a way that it just made it not viable. Like, we weren't going to do it in any near time, because like the return and the time to like hopefully make it across the finish line, when it was so far that it didn't make any sense. But now I hate to say it, but it almost feels so easy to put these blocks together to solve this problem that was, again, maybe not impossible, but close to not feasible, I guess, from an ROI and investment perspective. And now it seems just, like having the idea is the most critical part to it, and then the execution isn't as difficult. And I think it reminds me of the problem that I'm seeing, and I'm curious if you're seeing this too. There's a lot of, I mean, especially as an investor, like how many companies come to you like, hey, we are XYZ with Gen AI sprinkled on top of it or something like that. But, when I think about enterprises, when I talk to leaders, yeah, we have, 50, 30, 100 generative AI projects implemented or about to deploy. And then I ask them like, okay, well, how many of those really change the expectations of the consumer, or how many of those are you really, really proud of and that you would, love to share with me right now? And like, it feels like the room goes silent when I ask these very simple questions. And I'm curious, like on the profoundness meter, or how often are you seeing, wow, that's really cool, versus that's probably not going to work. And I'd love to talk about accuracy and precision somewhere, either in this question or the next one.
Yeah. So, I mean, this will seem sort of obvious or tautological, but these products are much more interesting to people when, and you know, that I say that kind of, a little bit tongue in cheek, but like there's a lot of magic in having a product work really well and do something like close to perfectly or exactly the way you want it. And there's real threshold effects here, right? So a lot of these analytics or AI products will start out, it might be a bunch of humans pretending to be an AI system, right? Don't pay attention to the humans behind the computer. And then over time, it may do some stuff okay, right? It may present a first draft to you, or maybe it can handle some really simple cases, but anything more sophisticated, it kind of punches out to the humans to handle. And then at some point, it gets accurate enough that it's better than the person who was doing it before, right? Which is no longer just a small marginal accuracy improvement. It's like a phase change, like ice turning to water. Sort of like when the elevator computer got good enough to stop the elevator at the right place on the floor, right? You stopped wanting a person with a stick to be in the elevator after that. And that phenomenon, we see in these various analytical use cases, and really, it drives down prices of many things, and it causes a huge number of things that are essentially economic complements to the thing that the task or the input that's going down in price, like and cost. All of those things become significantly more valuable, and you can see new business models get unlocked. Like we saw when the internet came on the scene with mobile, like Uber or Upwork, new labor can be unlocked in really hard to reach places. And it has a lot of second and third order microeconomic effects depending on the elasticity of demand and the impact on consumer surplus and things like that. And so I've been amazed in many cases within our portfolio, which is still in the relatively early stages of the journey of adding generative AI capabilities to category products, how powerful some of the products are. And just as a matter of course, like what people are doing often is experimenting, and they're trying out different things to see what works. Maybe it's something like a GitHub Copilot for their internal products, you know, design capabilities. Maybe it's interactive Q&A with the data that's already in the product. But in some cases, like with Quantimetric Helix, you stumble on a thing that requires the underlying product to work, but is truly magical and like does something that just the world has never seen before, right? Produce these very simple summaries, for example, of a really elaborate session that somebody has. And I think about this even in something as simple as a spreadsheet, right? Like if you can go from I have to build a model where I analyze gross retention rates, net retention rates, customer acquisition costs, and net new ARR being added by a raw customer file to I push a button and the spreadsheet does it for me. Right? Something that used to take weeks of work and it can do a better job at it. We're not there yet, but it's not implausible to imagine that a spreadsheet copilot could do something like that. Are you pay $10 a month for your spreadsheet software, right? Are you willing to pay another $10 a month or $40 a month or $100 a month for that if it saves you a week's worth of work every month? And so those are the products that I think have been the most powerful. And so what I'm seeing is companies, I think Quantum did a really good job with this. Is you'll do a hackathon, you'll experiment with different things, you'll see what works, and then you keep paying attention because the models themselves are getting better so much quickly that things that were not possible before, like I think people have been very quick to look at various limitations of the models and then be like, well, because the model can't do X, it will therefore never be able to do X, right? And then you just wait 60 days and the problem is completely solved, right? Like you get, they struggle with certain types of math and then now they have access to Python, code interpreter, calculators, and they basically solve the math problem. Or they can't think for long periods of time, and then you have the release of the O1 model, which has inference time compute and things like that. Or they can't really talk, or you can't interrupt them. You have to wait for them to finish, and like you have the advanced voice mode Q that comes out. So this is it's very rapidly moving, and even the real limitations, things like legal issues around copyright or training and inference costs. I mean, how quickly has the Gemini cost structure dropped, even over the time that you've been working with it, with things like Gemini Flash? It's like some of the most rapid price declines we've ever seen in any technology category in terms of the pace of the declines. Um, the reliability, the ability to handle things like privacy. I think this is where the quantum metric this is another huge advantage that category leading trust have is be able to handle things like privacy and PII, private information when you're dealing with, that consumer session is extremely important. Autometric is by far best in class on that topic. And so I think you'll see many of these limitations, not all of them, right? I think it's also naive to think that a problem will that necessarily go away. But many of them will start to fade and the capabilities will increase and new magical capabilities will get unlocked. And the really adaptable companies that are able to incorporate these things. And it's easier than ever, as I said earlier, to incorporate them because the AI part is being handed to you on a silver platter by the foundation model players. You don't have to hire hundreds of machine learning engineers, build out massive data pipelines, that kind of thing like you used to in the 2012 era systems. So I think that's been the way it's played out over the last couple of years, and it doesn't show any signs of like suddenly slamming on the brakes or slowing.
Yeah, yeah. The speed of this change has been, I've been developing for a couple decades, and I have never seen a technology change so quickly. And you know what really hurt me, honestly, because I don't think everyone picked up at the speed of change. And so I almost feel like I had a privacy hangover where like people kept talking about privacy about 6 months longer than they should have. Like we addressed privacy early on, and not quantum, but just I think the industry, including quantum, but it's like people kept talking like as if that was the soundbite to have amongst leaders. But I'm like, look, this has been soft. Why are we still talking about this? And I feel like I'm wondering what are some of the challenges that we're having today that maybe tomorrow. And you already said one of them, which was there are solutions that weren't possible because of the either cost or, for example, I know you and I have talked about context windows and that Felix AI data engineer when you want to send a web page to an LLM, but the context window is smaller than the web page, then vectorizing and chunking and all these kind of problems that make it difficult to solve all of a sudden disappeared. And I think we're getting up on time, so maybe a closing thought around. Do you have any predictions? Anything that you think is just around the corner? Some unlocks, or just and if not, if you don't want to be the oracle, maybe just like some big takeaway as we look forward about what will be unlocked with generative AI. Do you have anything that's maybe like just around the corner that like, hey, hold on to your seats because there's going to be some massive change coming ahead?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're starting to see the uh, early impacts of this already. But the new capabilities coming out with inference time compute and multimodal, I think people haven't fully digested the impact of. So the new O1 model from OpenAI, and I would expect Gemini and Drawback to have similar capabilities coming soon, allows you to give the model much more time to think at inference time instead of just giving you the answer right out of the gate. And for something like processing a 15-minute session of e-commerce or software as a service experience, there's an extent to which that I mean, I've already had many examples of companies across our portfolio who just dropped in the O1 model into a use case that did not work. Right? They were like, "Oh, this is a thing that might work. Let's try it," and it didn't work. They're like, "Okay, I guess this doesn't work." And then they were like, well, now that O1 is out, let's see if that works. And it does. Right. And so, it goes from not working to working, which is a big difference. Right. And all it was a model update. And those will get better. And you'll be able to. And the other thing they will do is they'll give you a new dimension of scaling. So instead of having to go from, say, $1 billion to $10 billion at training time and another 9 months to get the better model, you can go from 10 cents to 100 cents at inference time and get a similar intelligence improvement. And right now, right? Maybe you can go to 1,000 cents, still not that much money. And maybe you can go to 10,000 cents and get these dramatic intelligence improvements in terms of what capabilities get unlocked. So I think that's one that has a lot of potential implications for the quantum metric space with things like Felix, but also with Felix AI data engineer and some of those as well. And then multimodal, where you're able to send it not just longer context lengths, but large amounts of video. I think Gemini has been at the frontier of being able to just like upload 2 hour long videos and have it be able to just understand what's in a level of fidelity that I think people are continuously surprised about. Understand images, but also to generate video and images and voice The interactive voice modes will unlock a lot of features. People are, I think struggling a little bit with finding all the business use cases for something like the new advanced voice mode, but it won't take long before people start to find those as these capabilities get API-ified and incorporated into some of these more business structured systems in the enterprise editions. So those are two keeping an eye on that are, they're all, you can already play with them to some extent, but we're just scratching the surface.
So, Lonnie, I've enjoyed diving into generative AI. I think what you just hit on, from cost to speed of inference to kind of double checking your work to purpose built or, level of sophistication of different foundational models. There's so much changing all at the same time that, as you mentioned, the things that we thought weren't possible will be unlocked. It's just a matter of time. And, because some of them are related to cost, some of them are related to time for inference, some of them are related to did we have or send the right data. So there's so much future. I think that being an investor in this space, you've got to really have a perspective that's more refined than just the average commentator. Like, you're putting millions or tens or hundreds of millions of dollars behind these decisions. So I think your authority in the space is amazingly strong. I want to thank you for joining us today and sharing your thoughts and insights. This is changing at a faster pace than I've ever seen it. I think, in my personal journey, like I think about the 1990s, the internet. I think about the mobile phone in the early 2000s and how it affected our lives. And there's basically only three moments in my life that has really been transforming. And it's hard to see it. Like when the internet came out, you didn't say, "Oh my gosh, look at the impact it will have on our elections," in 30 years. It's like I don't think anyone saw that. And just the way that how mobile phones have touched our lives is like profound. I'm going to leave this conversation open with like imagine 10, 15 years from now what we're thinking about the impact of generative AI has been on our lives, on society, on humanity. So I want to thank you for joining us today. Dylan, I want to pass it back off to you. Lonnie, thanks again for sharing your thoughts.
Thanks for having me. Great day.
Mario and Lonnie, thanks for a great session. And thank you all for listening. If you'd like to learn more about how Felix AI, the Gen AI digital analyst, can help your organization unlock the full potential of your analytics, just click the link in the Docs tab. Or if you're viewing this on demand, in the resources section below. And don't forget to join us for episode 2, Why Data Quality is Key to AI, featuring expert perspective from Google Cloud.